Elias Merrow was just trying to keep the peace. In a room floating 3 kilometers above the surface of the alien capital, he sat across from Queen Varelia, the ruling monarch of the Voltari Dominion, a race known as much for their elegance as for their utter lack of patience with what they called human humor. She hadn't blinked in over 30 minutes, not once. Her skin shimmered like mercury under the chamber's low light, and her voice, when it came, felt like velvet gliding over a blade. "You offer nothing new, Ambassador Moreau," she said. "Do all humans speak in circles?" Elias forced a smile, trying not to wipe the sweat from his brow. "Only when corners aren't an option." The translator didn't even attempt to make that sound less absurd. Varelia tilted her head. "Is that a threat, a proverb, or your version of surrender?" He fumbled for a reply, then said something he'd later describe as a panic joke, though the consequences were anything but funny. "Maybe we just skip all this posturing and get married. You, me, peace treaty included." The room went silent. Several advisors gasped. One Voltari noble's eye stalks retracted so violently it looked like an implosion. Elias tried to backtrack, his hands raised in surrender. That was sarcasm, earth humor. "I wasn't proposing," but Varelia stood. "I accept," she said, cool and measured. "Let the binding rites begin." "No, wait, what?" She turned, already issuing ceremonial orders. His translation, AI Bennett, beeped in his ear. "You've initiated a species-level agreement, sir. Estimated social fallout, 87% catastrophic. Estimated opportunity, unknown." And just like that, Elias Merrow became the accidental fiancé of the most powerful alien queen in the quadrant. Elias tried not to throw up. He stood in front of a silver archway carved with moving glyphs, each one glowing faintly like a heartbeat. The Voltari called it the Gate of First Intention. According to Bennett, his ever-helpful translation, AI, crossing through it with Queen Varelia would mark the ceremonial beginning of the binding path, a sacred Voltari tradition that, until yesterday, Elias hadn't known existed. "She knows this is a mistake," Elias muttered. "She has reaffirmed her acceptance 6 times, Bennett replied. "You are now trending across 6 star systems. Meme status, planetary." Queen Varelia approached beside him, graceful as gravity. She wore robes that looked like they'd been woven from moonlight, and her silver-flecked gaze didn't once break from the path ahead. "You fear the unknown," she said quietly, without looking at him. He glanced at her. "I fear getting married because of a bad joke." She didn't smile, but her tone was lighter. "Then perhaps it's time you learned to take your words seriously." As the two of them stepped through the gate, a low chime echoed. Above them, strands of light spun into the air like invisible threads being drawn together. The chamber beyond shifted around them, walls of glass that shimmered with constellations, floors that seemed too soft to walk on but somehow held their weight. "First trial, alignment of thought," Bennett whispered in his ear. "You must engage in shared decision-making without conflict." Translation, team building, extreme edition. A series of challenges awaited, some physical, some psychological. The first involved guiding a floating orb through a maze using only synchronized gestures. It pulsed in reaction to disagreement. "I move left, you move right," Elias said. "Got it." "I move where the correct path lies," Varelia countered calmly. The orb buzzed and darted off like a scolded cat. Half an hour later, after several near collisions and one awkward moment where Elias tripped over a levitating vine, the orb reached the center. It pulsed a shade of violet success. You're frustrating, Varelia said, watching the orb rise and disappear. I've been called worse, yet ... adaptive. He caught her watching him, not in the cold, analytical way she had during negotiations, but as if she was reassessing a puzzle she had almost solved. It unnerved him in ways he didn't have words for. The next trial was a dialogue in silence. Elias stood across from her as holograms of pivotal choices appeared between them, questions about loyalty, sacrifice, fear, and honesty. They could only answer with hand movements, eye contact, or posture. Somehow, through instinct and half-guesswork, they matched on every answer. When the final hologram faded, Varelia stepped forward. Your kind clings to chaos, she said, but you navigate it better than I expected. I had a great teacher, he replied. She paused, then said something he hadn't expected. Perhaps this binding path is not so ridiculous after all. Before Elias could say more, Bennett's voice interrupted. First trials complete. Compatibility score, 74%. Emotional volatility, elevated. Projected trajectory, developing ... rapidly. Later, in his private chamber, Elias stared at the stars outside his window. He could still feel the echo of her presence beside him. The Valtari Queen wasn't what he'd imagined. She was sharper, deeper, and more complex than any diplomat's report had prepared him for. The accidental engagement was starting to feel less like a mistake and more like something he wasn't ready to admit he wanted. And tomorrow, the second phase of the binding path would begin, whatever that meant. The second phase of the binding path began with fire. Elias hadn't expected that. He stood on a platform suspended above a series of glowing pits, each one filled with a different colored flame. Voltari priests in mirrored cloaks chanted in a language that made his skin itch, while drones hovered overhead, broadcasting the event to several 100 million curious viewers across the stars. Trial 2, Bennett's voice chimed smoothly in his ear. Co-navigation of elemental. Hazard zones. Purpose, evaluate trust, reaction, and unity under extreme pressure. Can't we just do a couples puzzle instead? Elias muttered. Varelia, now standing beside him in a form-fitting suit made of heat-reactive mesh, glanced at him. Your sarcasm has become predictable. Better than my aim, Elias replied, already dreading whatever came next. A moment later, a gong sounded. The bridge beneath their feet extended forward, but with gaps, traps, and glowing tiles that changed color every few seconds. They had to move together, step for step, choosing tiles based on shifting elemental readings. Don't step on red, Bennett warned, unless you enjoy spontaneous combustion. They leaped forward. Elias nearly missed the first tile, landing. Awkwardly, Varelia moved with precision, as if she'd trained for this since childhood. Left, she barked. He obeyed, barely avoiding a sudden burst of ice shards. Duck. He dropped instantly, heat flaring just inches above his head. By the fifth leap, Elias was panting. I thought this was a bonding exercise, not a survival sport. Bonding under stress reveals more truth than comfort ever will, she replied. At one point, the path narrowed to a single glowing beam over open flame. I go first, she said. No, Elias said, surprising himself. We go together. They stepped forward as one, balancing each other, moving in tandem. Her grip on his wrist tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to be certain. They made it across, collapsing onto a platform as the fire dimmed. The platform began to rise, lifting them above the trial ground. Bennett's voice returned. Trial to complete. Cohesion score, 82%. Shared decision-making, satisfactory. Banter density, moderate. Varelia sat still, her breath even. You didn't falter. Didn't have time, Elias said. Too busy trying not to die. For the first time, she smiled. A real one. Back at the ceremonial residence, Elias peeled off his soot-covered clothing and collapsed on a seat in his quarters. He didn't expect the door to chime, but it did. She entered without a word, stepping into the room like it was already hers. I have reviewed the results, she said. We are ... performing above expected thresholds. He raised an eyebrow. That's your way of saying we make a good team. We make an unpredictable one that is more valuable than you know. There was a pause, softer than the others before. I never expected to walk the binding path with anyone. She admitted, I never expected to walk it by accident. Elias replied, and just like that, the distance between them felt smaller. Not vanished, but smaller. Tomorrow, she said, her voice lower now, we begin the mirror exchange. It is the most difficult phase. What happens if we fail? He asked. Her gaze didn't waver. Then we walk away, separate, unbound. But neither of them spoke about that possibility again that night. They both knew they wouldn't. Asterisk, the chamber was silent. Too silent, Elias stepped onto the smooth obsidian floor of the mirror exchange, heart pounding. Above him, a dome of polished crystal reflected the faint shimmer of alien constellations. It wasn't a mirror in the human sense, it was alive, responding not to movement or appearance, but to thought, emotion, intention. Queen Varelia stood at the far end, still as a sculpture. Her silver eyes studied him, not with coldness, but with clarity. She had no crown now, nu formau arma, just a flowing sash wrapped across her shoulders, the color of midnight. This test, she said softly, shows who we are, not to others, but to each other. Elias swallowed. So it's a psychic projector disguised as emotional therapy, something like that. As they moved to the center of the room, the mirror above activated. Light rippled across the surface like liquid thought, then dropped downward, casting twin reflections on the floor beside them. Only, they weren't exact reflections. Elias stared at his own mirrored image, the version of him standing beside. His feet looked the same messy brown hair, same crooked posture, but his reflection held more. It radiated the weight of his doubts, missed opportunities, the pain of always feeling one step behind in rooms filled with smarter, smoother diplomats. But Varelia's reflection, Elias, turned to hers and stopped. Hers was regal, yes, but cloaked in loneliness, surrounded by silent faces. She stood, in crowds yet somehow alone. Her power was undeniable, but it came at the cost of being truly seen. There was strength in her image, and heartbreak. I didn't think I'd feel so naked, Elias muttered. Because you are, Varelia replied, not unkindly, neat. Their reflections began to move, not randomly, but as if they were watching themselves from another timeline. Elias showed him walking away, from the throne room, from the path, from her. He felt his breath hitch. Varelius showed her staying behind, greeting another suitor. Eyes blank, no light, no laughter. Elias looked away. Is this fate? No, she said, stepping closer. It's fear. He looked up at her, the queen, the alien, the woman, and then he spoke, clearly, for the first time, without deflection. I'm scared, not of you but of messing this up, of getting too close and ruining something that might. actually matter. That is truth, she said. And truth is the point. Her fingers reached out slowly. Carefully Anne touched his. The reflections froze. Light spilled from the mirror above in a warm, steady pulse. The chamber brightened, not harshly, but like dawn breaking after a long night. A tone sounded low and resonant. Bennett's voice emerged like a whisper in the air. Mirror exchange complete. Compatibility, recognition achieved. Truth bonded. Emotional sync at 91%. Alignment ascending. Elias exhaled slowly. So, we passed. You passed yourself, Virelia said. That's harder than passing a test. He chuckled quietly. Then I think we're really doing this. She studied him for a moment. More. You haven't run. You haven't sent guards. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of something new. I'll see you in the final trial, she said. And when she left the chamber, Elias stood alone, with his reflection for just a second longer. He didn't feel like a fraud anymore. He felt ready. The final trial wasn't what Elias expected. There were no puzzles, no elemental masses, no shimmering chambers designed to pry open his soul. Just a circle of smooth stone atop a quiet hill beneath a soft, violet sky. Twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the ceremonial plateau. Dozens of witnesses stood in silence, diplomats from Earth, Baltadi Nobilis planetary minds embedded in crystal towers that hummed in the distance. No cameras, no drones, just people. Watching. Queen Virelia stood across from him, radiant in ceremonial robes that flowed like liquid starlight. No crown, no scepter, just her. Her long silver hair swept over one shoulder, and her expression was calm but unreadable. Elias swallowed hard. The translator node at his throat pulsed once, signaling that the platform had accepted his presence. One step closer to forever or disaster. You may begin, said a Voltari elder from the Ring of Stone. Elias took a breath. I didn't come here to fall in love, he said, voice low but steady. I came with a folder of proposals, talking points, and a suit that barely fit. I didn't expect to make a joke that would get me accidentally engaged to an alien queen. But I also didn't expect to be seen, truly seen, by someone who could have crushed me with a single word. The wind brushed gently against him as he looked at her. I've learned more about myself in 5 days on this planet than I have in 5 years of diplomacy. You challenged me. You scared me. You matched me step for step, even when I didn't know where I was going. He paused. This binding path started as a mistake. But if you asked me now, I'd take that step on. Purpose. There were murmurs from the audience, some surprised, some quietly delighted. Then Virelia stepped forward. Her voice, as always, was clear and deliberate. I believed this path would end in separation, that the truth would unravel what was never meant to be, but instead it revealed what was hidden. In you, I found not only honesty, but balance. Imperfection wrapped in sincerity. Chaos with direction. She took one more step, closer now, a breath apart. I do not offer you a crown, she said, nor a throne. I offer you choice. She extended her hand. The bond is not complete unless you speak, not from obligation, but from truth. The moment hung suspended. Elias looked at her, this queen, this force of nature, this woman who had turned his sarcasm into sincerity and his clumsy words into real meaning. He took her hand. I choose this, he said softly, not as a diplomat, as a man. The air shimmered. A pulse of light burst upward from the platform, swirling into the sky above. The binding thread was complete, not just in ritual, but in heart. The crowd exhaled as one. Behind them, the twin suns rose higher, casting gold across the stone. Later, when the celebration had softened into laughter and starlight, Elias stood, with Varelia on a balcony overlooking the quiet hills. Music drifted faintly from below. Someone was singing in a language he didn't know but somehow felt. "You still sure about this?" he asked. She glanced at him, eyes reflecting the moon's. "I'm more sure than I've ever been." He smiled. "Then you should probably know I snore. I suspected as much." He laughed. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. There would be more trials in the future, political storms, difficult days. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had walked the path, and they had chosen each other, not by accident, but by truth. The end.